Today, we're diving into something super cool: how language really works. And I'm not talking about just grammar rules from a textbook. We're going to get into how it shapes our lives, our identities, and, well, pretty much everything about our society.
So, let me ask you this. Do you speak the exact same way to your boss as you do to your best friend? I'm guessing probably not, right? The way you ask for a report at work is going to be way different from how you'd ask a friend to pass the salt. And that little adjustment, that thing you do without even thinking about it, that is exactly what we're getting into today.
For the longest time, the study of linguistics kind of treated language like a perfect, sterile machine in a lab. It was all about the abstract rules, grammar, syntax, sounds, completely separate from the messy, complicated humans who actually use it. But here's the thing, that's only half the picture. Language doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not just a thing. It's woven into the very fabric of who we are. So, if language isn't just about dusty, old rulebooks, what else is there? Well, there's this entire field of study dedicated to looking at language out in the wild, in its social habitat. And what it reveals about us, it's pretty incredible.
And that field is called sociolinguistics. It's basically the study of the relationship between language and society. It's all about how our social world, things like your age, your gender, your social class, shapes the way you talk. And, just as importantly, how the way you talk shapes your social world.
So here's a good way to think about it. Formal linguistics, it's all about analyzing the structure of a perfectly crafted sentence, like it's under a microscope. But sociolinguistics, it gets excited about the real stuff. Why does some people say ask and others say ax? Why does a teenager's text message look nothing like a legal contract? How can the words you choose signal your social status? It's all about language in action. Okay, so to really get a grip on how language works in society, we've got to look at the groups within that society. Because here's the thing, we're not just speaking as individuals. We're speaking as members of all these different, sometimes overlapping groups. And that brings us to this key idea called a speech community. It's pretty simple, really. It's just any group of people who share a set of norms and expectations about how to use language. Think about it. Doctors have their medical jargon, right? Gamers have their own slang that the rest of us might not get. Heck, even your own group of friends probably has inside jokes and ways of talking that are unique to you. That shared language is like the glue that holds the community together. Now, when we talk about all these different ways of speaking, there are a few key terms that people tend to get mixed up all the time. So let's clear the air and define some of the big ones. Okay, first up, we've got this big umbrella term, language variety. It's really just a neutral catch-all way to talk about any distinguishable form of a language. So, the English spoken in New York City versus the English spoken in Australia, both are language varieties. Even the way Shakespeare wrote is a variety of English. It's a super useful term. Okay, now for the big one. Accent versus dialect. This is where people get tripped up. Here's the deal. An accent is only about pronunciation. That's it. A dialect, on the other hand, is the whole shebang. It includes pronunciation, plus grammar and vocabulary. So, for example, someone from the American South might have a Southern accent. That's how they pronounce their vowels. But they also speak a Southern dialect, which is why they might use words like y'all or have different grammatical structures. And this leads to a huge, absolutely crucial point. There is no such thing as a person who speaks without an accent. I'll say it again, everyone has an accent. We tend to think of accents as something that other people have, right? But from a linguistic standpoint, that's impossible. Since everyone speaks some kind of dialect, and every dialect has its own unique way of pronunciation, well, it means every single one of us has an accent. This idea of accentless speech, it's a total myth. Okay, so we've established that we all speak a dialect, and we all belong to these different speech communities. But, and this is a big but, we don't speak the same way all the time, do we? We are constantly, and a lot of the time without even realizing it, tweaking and adapting our speech to fit the situation. The linguist Martin Juice actually broke this down into 5 styles of speech that we all navigate. First, there's intimate, right? That's the private language you use with your partner or family. Then there's casual, how you talk with your friends. Consultative is what you use when you're, say, talking to a doctor or a shopkeeper. Formal is for things like public speaking or a job interview. And finally, you have frozen style, which is language that's fixed and unchanging, like wedding vows or public notices. Now, sometimes this kind of style shifting gets really, really formalized across an entire society. There's a name for this, and it's called diglossia. This is a situation where a whole community uses 2 distinct varieties of the same language, but for totally separate things. They'll have a high variety for formal stuff like government and school, and a low variety for everyday informal chats at home. And this is a perfect example. In parts of Kenya, you see this with Kiswahili. You have standard Kiswahili, which is the high or H variety. That's what you'll hear on the news or in a speech in parliament. But then you have Koine Kiswahili, the low or L variety, and that's what people use for chatting with family or giving instructions to a waiter. And you really wouldn't mix them up. Using the low variety in parliament would sound, well, just plain weird.
And for people who speak more than one language, this ability to shift gets even more interesting. It's called code switching. This is when a speaker flips back and forth between two or more languages, sometimes even in the same sentence. Now, for a long time, people mistakenly thought this was a sign of confusion, like the speaker didn't know either language well. But that couldn't be more wrong. It's actually a super sophisticated linguistic skill. It lets speakers navigate complex social situations, express their dual identity, or just find the absolute perfect word for what they're trying to say.
So we've seen how language varies, but that begs a really important question. Why do some of these varieties get more respect than others? Why is one accent considered prestigious and another one isn't? Well, this is where we connect language to something much, much bigger: power and identity. So let's pull back the curtain on how a so-called standard language even gets made. The key thing to understand is that it's not because that version is somehow linguistically better or more correct. Nope. It's a social process, and it's all about power. It happens in 4 steps. First, one dialect gets selected, and guess which one? Usually it's the one spoken by the most powerful people. Step 2, it gets codified. People write grammar books and dictionaries to lock in the rules. Step 3, it's elaborated. Its vocabulary gets beefed up so it can be used for everything from law to science. And finally, step 4, it gains acceptance from influential groups as the right way to speak, which, you guessed it, gives a huge advantage to the people who already speak it. There's this amazing quote that just nails this point perfectly. A language is a dialect with an army and a navy. I mean, that says it all, right? The line between what we call a language and what we call a dialect often has very little to do with linguistics. It's about politics, it's about power, and it's about prestige. A standard language is, at its core, just a dialect that had the muscle to make itself the norm. So what's the big takeaway here? Language is so much more than just words. It's your ID card. It's a marker of who you are, where you're from, and all the different groups you belong to. It's the tool we all use every single day to navigate our social world. So here's a thought to leave you with. The next time you talk, what will your language say about you?